The desert lay heavy with silence, the kind of silence that presses against a man's chest and makes his breath come short. Heat shimmered above the sand, and the sun bore down as though it meant to bleach every color from the world. A crooked wagon sat half buried in dust, its canvas torn, one wheel sunk in the earth like a weary animal refusing to move another step. Beneath its shade crouched a child no more than 5, her calico dress sun-bleached and frayed at the hem. In her small arms, wrapped in a strip of linen that had once been white, lay a baby so new to the world she had not yet learned what it meant to cry with strength. The older girl whispered to the tiny bundle, brushing dust from her sister's lips with the care of one who had been made mother far too soon. "Don't you fret," she murmured, voice hoarse. "Mama just went for firewood. She'll be back." Yet her eyes, wide and rimmed red from sun and fear, betrayed the words before they left her mouth. She was speaking less to the babe than to herself, clinging to the last echo of a promise that had already begun to dissolve in the heat. From the rise in the trail, a rider appeared. He was a solitary figure, his horse lean and sweat-dappled, the man himself worn by dust and distance. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his eyes, clear, watchful, and wary, scanned the horizon with the instinct of someone too long accustomed to disappointment. He meant only to water his horse at the dry creek, perhaps push through to the next town by nightfall. But the sight of a child beneath that wagon stopped him as surely as if a bullet had struck. He pulled the reins, the horse shifting under him, and the dust settled between them. He dismounted slow, every movement deliberate, not to startle. Children in the wilderness meant something had gone terribly wrong. The girl lifted her head at the sound of boots scuffing sand. For a moment she froze, lips parted, eyes bright as glass. Fear flickered across her face, then stubbornness, as though she had decided that if her mother did not return, she herself would stand guard. The man crouched several paces away, hands resting open on his knees. His voice was rough from disuse but gentle as he asked, "Where's your folks, little one?" The girl blinked against the sun. "Mama went to fetch wood. She told me wait here." Her small chin lifted, almost defiant. "She'll be back." The man's gaze drifted over the wagon, the empty land, the horizon without a figure in sight. Heat lay heavy on everything, and the air carried no promise of return. His chest tightened, but he did not let the weight of it show. He nodded slowly. "How long you been waitin'?" The girl's mouth opened, then closed. She pressed her lips tight, shaking her head as though numbers were too big for her to grasp. Instead she looked down at the baby and answered in a whisper, "Long enough she's hungry again." The infant stirred, letting out a weak, breathy cry, more whimper than wail. The man's hands twitched with the instinct to reach, yet he stayed still. He had lived long enough to know trust was a fragile thing, easily spooked. "Where's your pa?" he asked, softer still. "Ain't got one no more," the girl said. Her words carried no bitterness, only the flatness of something she had already learned to accept. She rocked her sister against her chest. "Just Mama. And she's gone." The man looked away, jaw tight. He had no business with other folks' burdens. A cowboy's life was made of trails and solitude, not children with hollow cheeks. Yet the sun beat down relentless, and the girl's small body trembled in the shadow of the wagon. If he turned away now, he knew he would carry the sound of that baby's faint cry to the end of his days. He removed his hat and set it gently on the ground before him, as if to level himself with the child. Dust clung to his sweat-dark hair, and the lines of weather and grief etched deep around his mouth. "Little miss," he said, voice steadier than he felt, "ain't right for you to sit out here in the heat. Let me help." The girl clutched the baby tighter, eyes narrowing. "Mama said don't talk to strangers." The words struck him harder than any insult could have. He bowed his head slightly, not in defeat but in respect. "That's wise of her," he admitted. Then, after a pause, he added, "But sometimes strangers are all the Lord sends." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the restless stamp of his horse. The girl studied his face, as though trying to measure the truth in his weathered eyes. At last, with a trembling hand, she loosened her grip and shifted the bundle toward him, not fully surrendering but offering the smallest thread of trust. He reached forward, slow as dusk settling, and touched the cloth. The newborn stirred, blinking against the light, and for the first time he felt the fragile weight of another life leaning into his calloused hand. A crow cawed in the distance, sharp and echoing, as though marking the moment. He gathered the infant with one arm and extended his other to the girl. She hesitated, then placed her tiny hand in his. The skin was hot, dry, but the grip steady. He rose with both children, the wagon's shadow falling behind him. Ahead stretched miles of open desert, the sky a merciless blaze. He glanced once more toward the empty horizon, then set his jaw. "Mister," the girl whispered, voice small but certain, "you ain't gonna leave us too, are you?" He did not answer at once. The truth lodged in his throat, heavier than any oath he had ever spoken. His silence stretched, then broke with a rough whisper carried on the heat. "Not while I got breath." And with that, the three of them stepped out from beneath the wagon's shadow, into the burning unknown. The town lay low against the horizon, its rooftops shimmering like wavering mirages, the dust of its main road curling up with each gust of wind. He rode in slow, the baby swaddled against his chest, the little girl perched in front of him, her arms locked stubbornly around the worn leather of his vest. The horse's hooves struck the ground with dull thuds, echoing in the hush that fell when eyes turned toward them. Townsfolk paused mid-step, women lowering baskets, men leaning from the shade of porches. Curiosity sharpened into suspicion as they took in the lone cowboy carrying children not his own. He dismounted without hurry, boots sinking into dust, and helped the girl down. She clung to his hand, her gaze darting from face to face, searching for kindness and finding only stares that weighed heavy as stone. The infant stirred, her faint cries tugging against the silence of the street. He tightened his arm around her, the small body light but unbearably fragile. They moved toward the mercantile, the clatter of the doorbell breaking the hush as he stepped inside. Shelves lined with flour sacks, lanterns, and bolts of cloth surrounded them, but what mattered was milk, something to still the baby's thin cries. The shopkeeper, a narrow man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked them over and frowned. "That yours?" he asked, jerking his chin toward the infant. The cowboy's voice came low. "She needs feeding." The shopkeeper's lips thinned. "Milk's scarce. Don't sell it, less I know who it's for. And I don't know you." His gaze shifted to the girl, who shrank against the cowboy's side. Whispers swelled outside the door, rumors blooming like weeds. The cowboy laid a coin on the counter. "A child's hunger don't wait on acquaintance." The shopkeeper hesitated, then shook his head. "Can't do it. Folks won't like me given to a drifter with borrowed young'uns." His words carried deliberate weight, enough to poison the air. Before the cowboy could speak, a voice rose from the doorway. An older man in a preacher's coat stepped forward, his Bible tucked under one arm. His eyes, lined deep with both weariness and compassion, fixed on the shopkeeper. "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not," he said softly, quoting scripture like a bell rung clear across the square. "The Lord did not ask whose blood runs in their veins." The shopkeeper shifted uncomfortably, but the preacher moved closer, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. She looked up, startled by the kindness, then quickly back to the cowboy, uncertain. "Bring some milk, Thomas," the preacher urged. "And be quick. This child is new to the world, and hunger waits for no man's judgment." Reluctantly, the shopkeeper fetched a tin pail, ladled out milk, and set it down with a clatter. The cowboy paid without a word, lifted the pail carefully, and carried it outside. The girl trailed at his side, her small face brightening at the thought of her sister fed. But outside, suspicion had already taken root. A woman whispered to another, her bonnet tilted low, "Where's their mama, then?" "He don't look the father's part." A man spat in the dirt, muttering, "Could be he found him. Could be worse." Their words followed like shadows, heavy and sharp. The cowboy kept walking, steady and silent. At the edge of the square, he found a trough where the horse drank. There, with careful hands, he filled a bottle from the milk and pressed it to the infant's lips. The baby latched, her thin cries fading into the rhythm of swallowing. Relief washed through him, not joy but something quieter, like a knot loosening in his chest. The girl leaned close, watching. "She likes it," she whispered, as though astonished life could return so quickly. Then, louder, with the bravery only children possess, "Thank you, mister." He tipped his hat slightly, eyes shadowed. "No thanks needed. Just what ought to be." The preacher lingered a moment, watching the scene, then laid a hand on the cowboy's arm. "This town can be slow to mercy," he said, voice low enough for only him to hear. "But hold fast. The Lord keeps account of quiet deeds, even when men do not." The cowboy met his gaze but said nothing. Words had never come easy to him. Silence was the only tongue he trusted. When the baby finally drifted into sleep, her mouth slack around the bottle, he lifted both sisters back into his arms. He turned away from the gathering stairs, leading the horse toward the road that trailed out of town. The girl glanced back once, her eyes meeting the wall of judgmental faces. Her small fingers tightened around his coat. As they passed the last building, she tilted her head up and whispered, almost pleading, "You ain't gonna let them take us, are you?" His steps slowed. The question burned in the space between them, heavier than the weight of both children combined. He looked toward the open land ahead, where the horizon stretched wide and unyielding. His jaw tightened, breath rough in his throat. "At last," he answered, voice no louder than the wind stirring dust at their feet. "Not if I got strength left in me." The girl exhaled, pressing her cheek against his shoulder, clinging tighter. And though the town faded behind them, the sound of its suspicion lingered like an echo he knew would follow them farther than dust could ever travel. The cabin came into view at the bend of the river, weathered gray against the green of willows and the shimmer of late light on water. It stood simple, a square of logs with a pitched roof and smokehouse sagging to one side, as though it had been waiting years for footsteps to return. The cowboy slowed his horse, the children held close, and for the first time in many days he felt something other than thirst and weariness, a sharp pang of memory, like an old scar aching before rain. He slid from the saddle, steadying the girl as she climbed down. Her eyes roamed the cabin with open caution, neither trusting nor condemning, only measuring. The baby stirred in his arm, soft breaths warm against his shirt. He shifted her gently and whispered as though she could understand, "This'll do for now." The door creaked when he pushed it open. Inside lay the stale scent of dust, wood smoke long gone, and solitude heavy enough to choke. A table waited in the center, one chair tipped on its side. Along the wall, a narrow bed with blankets folded stiff from disuse. The girl stepped in timidly, trailing her hand across the table's edge. Her fingers paused over a wooden horse, its paint chipped, one wheel broken. She picked it up, cradling it as if it were treasure rather than forgotten toy. "Yours?" she asked, her voice small. The cowboy shook his head. "Belonged to someone I knew." His words were clipped, but his gaze lingered too long on the toy before he turned away. He set the baby down in a box padded with rags, the closest thing to a cradle he could manage. The infant's tiny fists waved before she drifted back into sleep. The girl hovered near, protective as a mother bird. Hunger soon made itself known. The cowboy lit a lantern, its glow carving gold from shadows, and rummaged through shelves bare but for flour, beans, and a tin of lard. He built a fire in the hearth, awkward with long disused motions, and set a pan to heat. The beans burned first, sticking to the iron, but he persisted until smoke gave way to a rough meal. He set a plate before the girl, who eyed it warily. "It's black," she whispered. He managed a faint smile. "Still fills the belly." She tried a bite, then another, and giggled despite herself. "You cook worse than Mama." The word struck him, half wound, half balm. He let the moment pass without reply. Later, when darkness pressed against the windows, he found himself seated in the rocker with the infant cradled to his chest. Her breath rose and fell, light as bird wings, and in the quiet he hummed something low and formless. The girl curled on the bed, eyes wide open. "Mister," she said softly, "you think Mama's comin' back?" He rocked slower, searching the flames for an answer. "Sometimes," he said at last, voice rough, "folks don't come back. But sometimes the Lord sends another to hold ya, till the hurt don't burn so much." The girl stared at the fire, saying nothing, but he felt her watching him. Days gathered into a rhythm. He hauled water from the river, chopped wood, mended what the cabin lacked. The girl followed him often, chattering as children do, her small hand reaching for stones, twigs, anything she could claim as discovery. One morning she carried him a river shell, holding it solemnly. "It's lucky," she said. He slipped it into his pocket without protest, though luck had never been his companion. Trust grew not in leaps but in increments. Her laughter at his crooked braids, his patience with her endless questions, the way he let her sit the horse while he led them through shallow water. The infant thrived slowly, cheeks filling, cries growing louder. Life, once hollow, began to echo in the cabin again. One evening, the girl leaned against him as he whittled wood on the porch. Her voice broke the stillness. "Are you gonna leave us too?" His knife paused mid-stroke. He looked down at her, at the dirt smudged across her cheeks, the stubborn strength in her eyes that no child should yet carry. He laid aside the blade, resting his rough hand over hers. "Not while I got breath," he said, steady and certain. She nodded as though the words were enough, leaning her head against his arm. For the first time, he felt the weight of her trust settle into him like something permanent. That night, while the children slept, he stepped to the riverbank. Moonlight spilled silver across the water, and his reflection wavered back at him, lonely, worn, but no longer only himself. He thought of the wagon abandoned in the desert, of the girl's question echoing still, and of the baby's fragile breath warming his chest. Behind him, laughter rose suddenly from the cabin, the girl dreaming aloud, a broken giggle in her sleep. It startled him, struck him deep, as though the walls themselves had remembered joy. He turned, staring at the glow of lamplight seeping through cracks in the logs. For the first time in years, the cabin did not look empty. Yet as he stood in the hush of night, the faint sound of hooves carried from the distance, measured, deliberate, drawing nearer. His jaw tightened, and he felt the fragile peace of the river shiver around him. The summons came not as words on paper, but as murmurs in town, growing sharper with each retelling until men in vests and boots arrived at the cabin door. The cowboy stood in the doorway, hat low, while the girl clutched his leg and the baby cried against his chest. "You'll need to come before the judge," one of the men said. "Questions need answering." The cowboy said nothing, only saddled his horse and lifted the children up. Dust rose behind them as they rode back toward the town, each hoofbeat a reminder that the fragile peace they had built was under scrutiny. The courthouse was a wooden hall, hot with trapped air and the sour smell of sweat. Men leaned along the walls, women whispered in the benches. The cowboy carried the infant in his arm and held the girl's hand as they walked to the front. Her grip was fierce, her small chin set in a way that made her look older than her years. He did not look at the crowd. His eyes fixed on the judge, a man with a long face, beard trimmed sharp, spectacles gleaming. The judge leaned forward, tapping a pencil against the desk. "You brought 2 children into town," he said. "One scarcely out of the cradle. Yet they ain't yours, by blood or by paper." "That right." The cowboy's voice came low, steady. "That's right. Then what claim do you have to them?" The question cut, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Murmurs swelled like wind through dry grass. The girl stepped forward before he could speak, clutching his sleeve. "He didn't take us," she cried. "Mama never came back. He's all we got." Her voice trembled but carried. The crowd shifted, some faces softening, others hardening. The judge adjusted his spectacles. "Child, you're too young to know what's best. This man could be anything. He could have left you out there. Maybe should have." The cowboy drew a breath. His silence had always been his armor, but now it weighed like a chain. He lifted his head, eyes meeting the judge's. "Hunger don't ask for kin. A cry in the dark don't wait for bloodlines. All I got to give him is a roof and a steady hand. Sometimes that's enough." The room stilled. For a heartbeat, even the baby quieted, as if the words themselves demanded space. Then came the whispers again. A rancher scoffed. "Talks cheap. Who's to say he ain't after pity or coin?" A widow near the back shook her head. "My babes lived because a stranger fed us once." The divide in the room deepened, judgment and mercy locking horns. The preacher rose, his coat brushing the floor, Bible in hand. His voice rang clear. Which of these was neighbor to the one who fell among thieves? The one who showed mercy. And the Lord said, Go, and do thou likewise. He looked at the judge, then the crowd. We don't choose the blood we're born with, but we choose the love we give. That is the measure. The judge's brow furrowed. He tapped his pencil again, slower now. I'll not decide in haste. The welfare of children is not for gossip or scripture alone. This court will watch. We'll see if these young ones thrive, or if harm befalls them under his roof. His words carried the weight of a verdict not yet final, a reprieve wrapped in suspicion. The cowboy gave a single nod. He did not plead further. The girl squeezed his hand, eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. The preacher placed a hand on his shoulder as they turned to leave, murmuring low, Hold steady. The Lord writes slower than men, but his ink is permanent. Outside, the street blazed with afternoon heat. The townsfolk spilled out behind them, whispers trailing like smoke. The cowboy lifted the girl onto the horse, then the infant, climbing up after with the silence of a man carved from stone. Yet as they rode away, the girl leaned close, whispering fierce as any vow, If they ask again, I'll tell 'em you're my pa. The words struck him deeper than judgment, sharper than suspicion. He did not answer, for his throat closed tight. But as the horse carried them back toward the river, the weight of her trust settled heavy, a burden he would rather die beneath than cast aside. Behind them, the courthouse bell tolled, echoing across the plains, a sound that felt less like justice and more like a warning. The storm rolled in without warning, clouds stacking high and black over the plains, wind tearing at the trees as though the world itself meant to test what shelter they had built. The cowboy barred the cabin door, the girl clinging to his leg, the infant wailing in the cradle he had fashioned from pine boards. Rain struck the roof in furious sheets, and thunder shook the rafters. Inside, the fire guttered low, shadows leaping against the log walls. The girl pressed her hands to her ears, her wide eyes searching his face for steadiness. He bent to her level, his voice steady though the timbers trembled. Storms pass, little one. Hold on to me. He lifted the baby, her cries sharp and thin, and rocked her against his chest. His voice, rough as gravel, broke into a tune half-remembered, a hymn his mother once hummed by lamplight. The girl joined in, her high, unsteady notes weaving through his low ones. For a moment, their voices rose louder than the storm, and in that fragile harmony the cabin no longer felt so fragile. The wind roared harder, rattling the shutters until one flew open with a crack. Rain lashed inside, drenching the floorboards. He laid the baby in the girl's arms and strode to the window, forcing the shutter closed with his shoulder, latching it with a grunt. Water dripped from his hair as he turned back, heart pounding with more than exertion. He saw the girl cradling her sister, whispering calm through the thunder, and realized they were learning to weather storms together, no longer alone, but as something like a family. Hours passed before the storm broke apart, leaving the land soaked and silent under the moon. The cowboy stepped outside, lantern in hand, surveying the damage. Branches littered the yard, the river swelled high, but the cabin still stood. Behind him, the girl carried the baby to the doorway, her small figure framed in the glow. "We made it," she said, her voice trembling with both pride and relief. He nodded, unable to find words for the swell in his chest. The preacher arrived 2 days later, boots muddy from the road, carrying news. He stood on the porch, Bible tucked under his arm, and told them the court had yielded. The children were his to raise if he chose. No bloodlines, no papers, only trust and witness. The girl gasped, clutching his hand so tight her knuckles whitened. He only bowed his head, the weight of choice heavy as an anvil yet strangely lightened by the warmth of her grip. That night he built a fire brighter than any before, cooking bread and beans, setting 3 bowls on the table. The girl giggled as she showed him how to wrap the infant in fresh cloth, her small fingers guiding his clumsy ones. When she set her head against his arm at supper, he felt the knot of years loosen, as though grief itself had been waiting for this table, this moment. Still, judgment had not vanished. A townsman stopped by days later, leaning on the fence rail, his voice edged with scorn. "You ain't no father. Folks won't forget." The cowboy met his gaze, calm as still water. "Blood makes kin," he said, voice quiet but certain. Love makes home. The man spat in the dirt and rode off, but the words lingered in the air like a vow. The girl asked later, "Did he make you mad?" "No," he answered, lifting her onto his knee. "Mad's wasted. I got better things to keep hold of." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled, as if she understood. When dawn came again, soft and gold, the girl rose early. He found her setting 3 bowls without being asked, one for herself, one for him, one tiny for her sister. The fire crackled, casting light across their faces. The baby gurgled softly from the cradle, the girl hummed a lullaby as she worked, and the cabin felt less like walls of wood and more like a heartbeat steadying itself. He stepped back from the table, taking it in, the chipped bowls, the rough bread, the laughter of a child not yet lost to grief. His chest ached with the enormity of it, not the kind that broke but the kind that mended. Outside, the river ran full from the storm, carrying branches, leaves, and the wreckage of what had been. Inside, something new had taken root, quiet but enduring. He knew storms would come again, and whispers in town would never fully cease, but as he watched the girl bow her head in a clumsy prayer of thanks, he understood that home was not promised by blood nor by law. It was built in the simple grace of staying, of choosing again each day. The baby stirred, and he reached to lift her, pressing her against his chest. The girl looked up, smiling as though the world had finally kept a promise. For a moment, silence held them, the kind of silence not born of emptiness but of fullness, where words were no longer needed. And perhaps that was the true ending of their wandering, not in a mansion, nor a wedding, nor a promise shouted loud, but in bread on a wooden table, and the way the girl leaned her head against his arm when she thought he wasn't watching. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.